Hi everyone, Greendragon here, aka Kirsten from theonering.net, and I am thrilled to be joined today by Paul Corfield Godfrey and Simon Buttle, and they are here. You may have read on our website recently about the very exciting opera project delving into Tolkien's first stage, and they're here to tell me more about that, and I can't wait to get stuck into that. But first, gents, can I ask you to introduce yourselves?
Yes, I'm Paul Corfield Godfrey, and I've been working in the field of setting Tolkien to music since I was in my late teens, which goes back rather longer than I'd care to remember, just over 50 years now. And the Silmarillion was a work which occupied my time, not exclusively, but more or less from 1982 through till 1996. And has now been revisited with a fifth segment of what was already a very large work, written in the last 3 or 4 years.
Hi, I'm Simon Crosby Buttle. I'm a full-time opera singer, and in my spare time, I'm part of Volante Opera Productions, who specialize in recording works that have never been heard. And our journey with Paul started about 6 years ago.
So that's very, very exciting, and I want to delve straight into it. It's a new ring cycle, one could say. So tell us, just, for anyone who hasn't seen the article on our homepage or hasn't read about this before, I know that there are 5 sections to your ring cycle. Tell us what the pieces are that you have been writing for all these years and now working on and recording.
Right. There were originally 4 parts of the cycle. 3 of them were what Tolkien used to call the great tales of the first age: Beren and Luthien, the Children of Húrin, and the Fall of Gondolin. And in addition to that was also what I suppose you might call a prologue, although it's a very large-scale prologue, which covered the whole business about the creation of the Silmarils in the first stage, and which, for the sake of giving it a title, I entitled Fëanor. And Fëanor starts basically where the Silmarillion starts, with the creation of the world, with the Ainul Indale. Beren and Luthien then takes up the story of Beren and Luthien, obviously. The Children of Húrin similarly. The Fall of Gondolin was more tricky because I was simultaneously trying to tell the story of the Fall of Gondolin and also provide a conclusion to the cycle, largely because it struck me that there was not enough material by Tolkien to actually make a 5th segment covering the tale of Eärendil and the end of the first age. And the cycle, when it was completed in 1996, 1997, was already a large-scale work spreading over 4 evenings. And when I tried to get any sort of interest from people in performing it, I was told far too expensive, far too complicated, cannot be done. About 5 years after that, I I wrote an Eärendil setting, which was basically Bilbo's poem from the Fellowship of the Ring, and I was hoping that which was obviously following on from the music of the Silmarillion itself, would help to actually sell the work as a whole. It fell on totally deaf ears, and it wasn't until Simon came along about 10 years later, under circumstances which in themselves could fill half a book. But it wasn't until he came along, as I say, some 10 years later. And the original idea was that we would just record little bits of the Fall of Gondolin. And we started off experimenting with various ideas of how to do it. And it progressively snowballed. First of all, Simon, with his contacts from the Welsh National Opera, was able to find a whole load of singers who he cajoled, bullied, dragooned into recording the
I
work.
didn't quite reach bribery, but it got close.
And the result was, after about a year and a half of work, I suppose,
Yep.
we actually finished up with a recording of The Fall of Gondolin. And because I already had some contacts with prima facie record label, who'd actually already released a recording of some of my other Tolkien songs a couple of years earlier, they actually took on board the sale of The Fall of Gondolin, and we actually put it out. Up to this stage, none of the singers have been paid anything, and the whole thing had been done just as a labour of love, to a large extent, which I
Large labour of love.
about which I felt extremely grateful and not a little guilty. But as I say, after that, and because we were actually producing it, the idea came in that the singers would actually be getting some royalties back from the performances as well.
The recordings from
For
the sales.
for the sales, yes. And we then moved on to do Beren and Luthien, then the Children of Húrin, leaving Feanor till last for one very good reason, which was the way I'd written it, the whole of the first segment of Feanor consists entirely of work for the chorus, which takes a lot longer to record, a lot more complicated. But anyway, as it was, we actually managed, despite COVID and despite everything else, to complete the recording earlier this year. In the meantime, Simon had taken it upon himself to point out to me that The Fall of Gondolin didn't really finish the story off, which is quite true, it didn't. And he suggested that we could certainly record the Lay of Eärendil as an appendix to the complete recordings. But then progressively over discussions over probably about 8 or 9 months, he convinced me that in fact there was enough Tolkien material to produce a libretto for a complete extra segment, which we titled The War of Wrath, which basically covers the whole of the end of the first stage, brings in the ruin of Doriath, which had previously been missing altogether, includes the Lay of Eärendil, moves on into the second age, right up to the creation of the One Ring. And then we had a major problem at the end, in that the story just sort of fizzled out, as it were. And it wasn't until I was talking to Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull at the Tolkien 2019 event in Birmingham that they suggested I should look at some of Tolkien's early unfinished poetry, well, not unfinished, Tolkien's very finished poetry on the Cortillion theme. And in fact, from that, I managed to extract a text, basically Tolkien's own description of how the elvish influence extends into modern life. And that struck me as being a very nice way of ending the Silmarillion. So we get a full-scale trio for the 3 ring bearers, plus chorus at the end of The War of Wrath, to make a sort of grand, spectacular conclusion.
That's an understatement.
And that the recording is now, I would say, probably about 3/4 complete.
Yes, sorry, that was my printer making a funny mess. Yes, the recording's about 3/4 complete. We've got a few solo voices and a couple of chorus voices left to go in, but it's well on its way. I will say with War of Wrath that I am not wholly to blame for it being as big as it is. My original idea was a 1-act or slightly bigger that was just the story of Eärendil. And through various mishaps with Paul, he ended up isolated in a hospital for a while. And he came back to me after that and said, I think we can go bigger. So what started off as just the story of Eärendil, because it was originally the journey of Eärendil would have been the final part, and it would have, basically finished with the War of Wrath itself. But Paul decided that he wanted to go earlier and later and to try and finish off this massive work in every which way possible. And the amazing thing with it is that almost everyone, except for myself, because I die in every single one of these operas when we've recorded them, but almost everyone else their characters were either still going or versions of them. So everyone is back nearly. There's a couple that aren't, but so it meant that the cast is enormous. The story is, by its nature, slightly more fragmented than some of the others. But as I said to Paul, you wouldn't watch Return of the King without watching the first two parts. So if you're going to jump in at the War of Wrath, you need some foreknowledge of things. So it's the Fall of Doriath is amazing, the first act, and we used an earlier version of Tolkien's words that was in the History of Middle Earth for that. Won't necessarily play out exactly as people expect from the Silmarillion, but trust me, for operatic means, it's gorgeous. The Journey of Eärendil itself, the middle section, uses the Lay of Eärendil and other bits dropping in and out. The War of Wrath is a piece of music like the actual War of Wrath is a piece of music like you have never heard. I could show it you in a vocal score, but the vocal score does not have all of the information for what is being played. And then I will say the epilogue is absolutely stunning. It's the whole idea of it was that we already had Galadriel as part of it because she pops up in the Fall of Doriath. There would be Elrond because basically I'm playing Eärendil, and then when he goes and becomes a star, I will then play his son Elrond. And we also had Círdan as part of it. So you have the three elven ring bearers at the end of the Second Age, basically seeing their power waning, but preparing the world for what continues on. And that felt like a nice way, because we didn't want to end it with the Lord of the Rings. You have to finish the Silmarillion as the Silmarillion. You can't say, oh, this to be continued. You have to have a kind of end point, and having a more reflective end point was a much better idea. But yes, I am not wholly to blame for that work being 2 hours plus long.
So you have pretty epically covered the first stage, covered the Silmarillion. And I want to just mention and address right now sort of the elephant in the room, because there's been a lot of discussion and debate around Rings of Power and why aren't they doing things from the Silmarillion? Why aren't they using the stories from this book, from that book? And we all know it's because they don't have the rights. But you guys do have rights to do what you're doing with Tolkien's writing, correct?
Yes. This was a very complicated story going back to the 1970s when I originally contacted Rainer Unwin about rights to, at that stage, I was still interested in The Hobbit, which I'd written most of, and The Lord of the Rings, of which I'd written fairly substantial chunks. And I wanted to know what the prospects were for getting any sort of performances. And Rainer Unwin said, you could basically take it from me, they're going to be more or less zero. And when the Silmarillion came out, again, there was a similar problem that, of course, when the original one-volume Silmarillion came out, there was very little dialogue in there. And although there were some very, very attractive parts of the plot, in particular the Children of Húrin, there was certainly not enough vocal material to constitute an operatic setting, or indeed any other sort of vocal setting. And it wasn't until Unfinished Tales appeared 3 or 4 years later that I then went back to Rainer Unwin and said I was very interested in doing a setting of the Children of Húrin, at that stage only the Children of Húrin, and what was the position regarding that? And he came back and said, basically, you've got to get Christopher Tolkien's agreement. That will not be given until we've actually heard some of what you're proposing to actually do. Which put the ball firmly back in my court. I had, but at that stage, written literally about 3 or 4 minutes of the opening of the Children of Húrin, which was the dialogue between Morgoth and Húrin.
Quiet, calm bit.
Yes, probably one of the noisiest bits of the score. And I actually corralled a friendly local pianist, got together in my front room and recorded the whole of that opening segment, with me taking the roles of both Húrin and Morgoth. In order to get the amplification for Morgoth, I had to sing with my head in a bucket. No video available.
Shame.
And this went off, and much to my amazement, they came back and said, yes, go ahead. And Christopher Tolkien then came back and said, what did you have in mind to actually construct the libretto? And we had quite a lengthy correspondence about how the text could be put together. Because, of course, with Hurin, you had to cut back drastically on certainly the earlier part of the story in order to leave room that you could run on for about 3 or 4 hours. Sorry. Christopher Tolkien was very helpful on that and actually gave me access to some bits of drafting by his father, which at that stage were unpublished, although they did later appear in the History of Middle-earth. So I was able to actually take some little bits out of that, make some alterations and construct a libretto. And after that, we went ahead and chunks of The Children of Hurin were given at the Oxenmoot in Oxford in 1982 or 83, I think it was, with Priscilla Tolkien in the chorus.
Oh, wow.
And after that, people kept saying to me, well, why aren't you doing any more of the Silmarillion? And my immediate reaction was, well, there isn't enough text. And Priscilla Tolkien said, oh, yeah, but there's a lot more to come. Of course, she was quite right. There was a lot more to come. And progressively, over a period of about 10 or 12 years, I managed to mold a further 3 evenings of music, as I say, the shape of Better Than Luthien, Paul Corfield and Fëanor, out of the text that was actually there. But I haven't made a point throughout of sticking as closely as possible to Tolkien's original wording, very minor alterations occasionally for the sake of clarity, other minor alterations for the sake of the way the music actually lies on the words. I think I should possibly explain that a little further. It is clear when you look at the way Tolkien sketched The Lord of the Rings that he was continually fiddling around with the actual word order in order to provide what I call a sort of a verse underlay, not just in the Tom Bombadil scenes, but elsewhere in The Lord of the Rings. You see that the music is laid out in such a way that there is a rhythmic flow to it. With the Silmarillion, he never actually went to the extent of completing it, except in odd places, like the Children of Hurin. But there are other places where the text has obviously not gone quite that degree of fine-tuning. And occasionally I've had to, what I would say, supply this so that the music flows in what I might call a slightly more musical fashion.
Yeah.
But again, those are rare instances. And by and large, I've tried at all points to stick to what Tolkien actually wrote. There is no substantive addition to anything that it was not by the author himself.
And your Beren and Luthien and your Children of Hurin, these predate the recent publications that we've had of gathering together of notes and putting those out as one kind of consolidated story. You've done this before that happened, so you didn't even have that handy text to hand. You were really having to go back to those original notes.
Sorry, yeah, and the Fall of Gondolin as well, because the text for the Fall of Gondolin was using various versions, which you find in the book of Fall of Gondolin now, but also there's the section of Maeglin, isn't it?
The whole of the Maeglin section, which is the first act of the Fall of Gondolin, is taken straight from the Silmarillion version of the text. But of course, that then later appeared as part of the Peoples of Middle-earth, or wherever it was, in the History of Middle-earth, very much later on in the series. In fact, in Better Than Luthien, there are sections of Better Than Luthien, and also 1 or 2 sections in the Children of Hurin, where I was working from Book of Lost Tales material, rather than from the Silmarillion as published originally in 1977, or indeed as included in Christopher Tolkien's version. For example, with Better Than Luthien, his Better Than Luthien book, or the later book, does not contain Luthien's hymn in Elvish, which is in the later Beleriand, but you don't find anywhere else in the history of Middle Earth. That is now in my musical setting, as indeed it really ought to be.
This is one of the challenges that anyone is facing working on Tolkien's material, is how many times he revised and revisited. And it's been discussed a lot recently with Rings of Power and Galadriel's character and her story, how many changes there were in different versions of her story. And so you've been grappling with that in trying to stay close to Tolkien's writing, to completely faithful to Tolkien's writing, but also tease out a coherent strand from different versions.
Yes, we had I've already hinted at it with the destruction of Doriath. This was one that I had a hand in, so I can talk about this one. But the version in the book of the Silmarillion, even correct me if I'm wrong, but even Christopher Tolkien wasn't completely happy with that. He basically redacts part of that in the history of Middle Earth. And when we were looking at it, it's also a case of finding things that would work on stage. And also the fall of Doriath, because it happens twice, basically it's a 10-year period, isn't it? So that it falls and Thingol dies, and then 10 years later the sons of Feanor take it from his son. And it happens very rarely in these pieces where we've had to edit and do stuff, but to have a big grand end to Doriath, we put the two together. And rather than introducing a load of characters that just pop up to say one or two lines and go, we basically made it so that it's the sons of Feanor attacking to get the Silmaril from Thingol. It's a very small compression, but you have to remember, in an opera, you're trying to tell a story in 2 hours. And things need to come together. And in this earlier version, there's this brilliant scene with Melian, where she's basically in the throne room awaiting Thingol, who is out hunting. And he gets beheaded by dwarves, I think it is, isn't he? He gets beheaded by dwarves, and they come in and present his head to Melian. And it was, I think, well, if you're going to do an operatic kind of scene, that is much grander than anything else. So what we have is that Melian is in the throne room with Elwing, because there's, like I said, there has to be a little bit of time compression. And it's the sons of Feanor that show up with Thingol's head and dump it in front of Melian. And you just think that is such a powerful image. And it could have been something that Tolkien himself might have thought about if he'd have, when he'd been working more on it. But it just means that you have this kind of wonderful, kind of really powerful section in an opera where, to be honest, a beheading never works on stage. It makes you laugh. So, and often to avoid as many large-scale battles on stage as possible is a good thing, because you have to be believable. But to be able to just present a head, and Salome-esque, is just present a head, wonderful shock value to it. But yeah, it's so we've stayed. Paul has stayed, and I think in the War of Roth there was only a couple of word changes that we did to refer to characters or to remove references to things. So there's definitely Tolkien uses lots of different names for things, so often we change it so that it stays the same name. You don't want to give people lots of different names, especially if we want to be friendly to people that don't know the story as well as people that do. So it's
you make a very good point about adaptation in general there, that even with work such as yours that is epic in scope and you've got quite a lot of time to play with, although it's not enough time for a huge story, so you've got to, as you say, make some choices, make some edits, and you're always going to have to make choices when you take something from a book to an opera or a stage show or a film or whatever it may be. And what we hope is that people make choices very much with what they think Tolkien would have wanted, or with the spirit of Tolkien very much at heart of all of that. And it sounds like that's absolutely what you've done.
Yeah, I think actually, I mean, you were saying earlier about the fact that Tolkien had left so many different versions of the story. is actually a major advantage here. And going back to the ruin of Doriath again, the fact that in one of his things, you put a big X against the passage where he was talking about saying, cannot happen this way. He obviously was unsatisfied about the idea that the dwarves were involved, although he'd actually referenced it back in The Hobbit. So there's sort of, but the fact is that he was left uncertain about how it was actually to be achieved. And by actually having the sons of Fëanor, who after all are elves, are therefore presumably able to enter Doriath, you actually manage to get the whole you manage to get the whole thing to actually hold together without fracturing Tolkien's original structure. And as Simon says, the moment we're coming in and presenting the head is one of those things that no composer worth their salt should ever try and pass up.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I hope, Paul, that you've kept your correspondence with Christopher Tolkien, because that is, for a Tolkien fan, it's very exciting to hear that you have gone back as much as you could, sort of to the horse's mouth, to the person who was the curator and custodian of his father's estate. How much did Christopher ever get to hear of your music? Because obviously these recordings that you've been doing have been a more recent project. Did Christopher get to hear any more finished other than you singing in a bucket?
As glorious as that would have been.
He did have a chance to hear some synthesized versions I'd done of the score in the late 90s after that, but as far as I'm aware, he never actually got, although I did send him copies of the first 3 parts as they came out before he died, but I never had any response back from him as to, or indeed from Priscilla.
Oh, you did actually. You had a brief correspondence from Priscilla.
Oh, I did.
Not too long before she passed, but
she did have a chance to hear it.
Yeah, she heard. She definitely heard Fall of Gondolin, Children of Húrin, and Beren and Luthien, from what we know. But yeah, but we are dedicating the War of Roth to Priscilla, and the Children of Húrin is dedicated to Christopher because he passed as we were getting that ready. So
well, the Children of Húrin was already dedicated to Christopher Tolkien. And I wrote to him back in 1983, 84, basically saying I wanted to do that. He was very happy to accept the dedication. And as I say, the correspondence continued over the years, on and off.
Yes, we've got letters well into the 2000s, haven't we?
Yes,
the early 2000s. We have kept them on record. So.
Yes, I mean that is an archive in itself that people would be fascinated to delve into, and the fact that Priscilla was in the chorus for one of your performances early on. I mean that's just great that this is so sort of interwoven with the Tolkien family and with the estate. That's
we rehearsed that performance at Priscilla's house using her piano, which I gather was Edith Bratt's piano originally.
Oh wow, well that's quite something, isn't it? That is quite something. That gives me goosebumps.
An archive recording of that performance, but obviously we don't know we can't get the performers and we can't get the rights to release it. But it's a wonderful atmosphere to it, because it's that certain people are there watching and certain people are there in the choir for it and things. It's yeah. So it's a very nice recording, but like I say, we can't let anyone have it, unfortunately.
Alas. So tell me, the stories are epic. It's been an epic journey all the time that you've been working on this, the text, the music. Are the personnel required for these operas also epic? Is it a huge orchestra?
Yes. Well, I have to say with these recordings, we have used sampled. Sorry, that was my phone. We can ignore that. We have had to use sampled orchestra sets. As I would, more than anyone, I would love to hear these played by a real orchestra. But the size of the orchestra required for these, it's symphonic orchestra. We don't have, we are a very small scale thing. We don't have the budget for them. But the samples we have used are as close as you can get to real without actually being real. But yes, the orchestra is 80 pieces, is it?
At least 80.
At least 80. By the time you get to War of Roth, it gets even bigger. It would require a chorus of at least 40, if not more, for some of the works. So when we've recorded these works, I have done it with 8 people, and everyone records individually. So I've helped by editing it and mixing it so that it's always clear. But that's why we have a moniker of complete demo recording on these works. I would love to hear them with everything and everyone on them properly. Well, yeah, I mean, what we have done is, trust me, they sound brilliant. But it would,
I will agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can be actually frank about the actual quality of the recordings. They are as close to being ideal as we can get.
Even if you will kill me off in every one of them. But yeah, and the cast itself is obviously large. There's there has been double casting or triple casting in some cases throughout the entire thing. Like I couldn't just say, for me, I couldn't just say I am being Turin and nothing else, because everyone on these recordings has done it for nothing. They're doing it on a profit share basis. So it was a case of like, we have to spread this out and make sure everyone's doing the most. But obviously, if everyone's doing it for nothing and I'm the one in charge, then if there's an enormous thing that I don't want to give that's too much for someone else, I've taken it on. So yes, me doing Feanor, that was fun. So that's a big thing. But it's it's just wonderful that all my friends were willing to be part, and they are amazing. They're amazing on this, considering that they are here in the booth just outside of Paul by themselves, with me waving my arms and trying to help them here and getting them through it and making it sound like we're all together. Because even the chorus, everyone's recorded one at a time. So all 8 people have recorded one at a time, and then it's mixed afterwards. And we've had some great fun recording sessions. Lawrence, who plays Morgoth, he plays Morgoth with quite a lot of glee. I think he enjoyed it. And Harrod, our Luthien, she was absolutely stunning. She had just given birth to her son, and she came. It was one of the first things she did when she was getting back into singing. I mean, they're all amazing. I mean, we just a couple of days ago, I had our Elder King, our Manway, in recording for War of Wrath, and they're all great, considering the vast majority of them are not Tolkien fans, so that they're getting potted versions of the stories from me that will help them get through everything. And I mean, I could say, or I will happily say all their names, but you all get bored of me talking for hours. But every single one of them has been incredible. Yeah. And I will say Julian, who's the other half of Volante Opera Productions, he does a lot more than most of the others, but his Baron in Baron and Luthien, that is a challenging part. Yes. It's a very challenging part, and he took it in good grace, as much as he needles Paul about it. But there's it's been an incredible journey through them, and I wish you could witness some of the recording sessions, because we do have fun. You have to have fun, especially when you're doing the Children of Hurin, where that's a light story to get through. We were jokingly referring to it as the comic interlude whilst we were recording it. So it's and trying to explain that story.
When you're doing a bit of recording for War of Wrath, you'll have to snap a few candid behind the scenes shots and let us share a few.
I'm already thinking of it. We do have a few people. We've only got a handful of people left to come, but there's definitely some of them that we can do that. We'll get some. You might end up with a Christmas tree in the background at the minute, but it's but there will be a few. I'm onto it now. I will.
I'm a little dismayed, not at all surprised, because these are epic tales, but I'm a little dismayed by the epic scale required, because I actually have my own little opera company, but it's a chamber opera company. And when I first heard about these, I was like, ooh, maybe I can stage them. And I'm like, oh no, that's a little beyond my scope at the moment. But my mind is going, how can we make something happen to at least have a live performance?
There is one segment that is suitable for smaller scale production, which is the love scene for Baron and Luthien, where Luthien and Baron first meet. That I have published in a chamber opera version with much smaller orchestra, chorus, and 2 soloists as Baron and Luthien, plus a solo flute as Darren playing in the trees. And that I originally wrote as a sampler back in the early 2000s, with the idea that somebody might take it up. Nobody ever did. Nobody ever did.
Perhaps this is a happy meeting. Talking of which,
I'm sorry, I was going to say one thing to pick up on what Simon was saying about Fëanor. Fëanor as a role is an absolutely horrific thing.
Yes, it is.
When you're writing music for Tolkien, you've got to write for big heroic voices. It's no good writing it for somebody who sounds like a tenor who's crawled out of a church mouse.
It's an interesting image.
That's not the image I was intended. Fëanor is probably the ultimate example I can think of a role that's really written on a huge scale, almost a superhuman scale. It requires a tenor who's not only got a full scale heroic voice, but can also produce top notes at a rate of like that. When he's rousing the elves to actually follow him, every stop is being pulled out. And
I went deaf a few times mixing it. Singing it.
When Simon was recording it, I mean, it would be. I would say it would be almost impossible to bring up on stage.
I wouldn't want to sing Fëanor live. I will happily pass Fëanor over to someone else. But because we're in a recording studio, it's you can get away with things. But the orchestra is full pelt.
But the one thing that Simon did do, which was not authorized by myself,
not straight away anyway,
was to actually throw in an additional top C sharp at the end of his.
As you do, just throw it in there. Oh, why not C sharp?
And I heard it. I said, "Yeah, we'll keep that." I wrote it into the score, but it is written in as an option, and I very much doubt that any tenor, anything in sanity, will ever try and sing it on stage.
I will. When we were doing a couple of retakes for Fëanor before it was released earlier this year, and when I'm singing, Julian's in here on the desk, and I re-recorded the entirety, sang it straight through as well, because you can cut in and out, but I just thought I would be kept hearing it, because that's the thing, I hear it all the time, and I'm just thinking I just sound a bit too nice. He just sounds like he's Fëanor going, oh, I don't, we'll curse the Valar. So I just thought, right, I'm going to go in and be nastier and give it a bit more, which of course meant that I had to retake that stupid high note that I did do as a joke at the end. So Julian was sat here and I said, right, we're just going to retake this, and I'll cut and paste in if I have to and use bits of it. And I did one complete new take of the entire thing. Sang it all the way through, hit the note at the end, God knows how, but I hit the note at the end. And Julian was just sat here and he just looked at him and went, okay. I was like, yeah, we'll leave that. Yeah, it's basically that is the take that is on the CD now. But it was you're basically standing in a booth going for quite some time. But it's it's a glorious scene. But Fëanor, I'm sorry we had to leave it till last, but it's a wonderful. Yeah, it is a wonderful piece. It's incredible, but it is huge for everyone involved. Even Julian singing Mandos, the Doom of Mandos, which is 10 minutes long, is it?
Yeah.
Which is just him singing for 10 minutes. That's that is a massive piece, and he got through it with good grace. But
that again is hard work for the singer.
Yeah.
And I do apologize to the singers for what I'm doing it, but that's what Tolkien asks for.
Definitely.
You can't go at this. You can't go at this in a sort of half-hearted fashion. You've got to go for it like that.
The majority of opera singers are not scared of difficult. It's a challenge. So that's the thing that we saw it as. And the only time I've actually said something to Paul and stuff has been there's only been a couple ever so minorly. That's not even a proper way of saying it, but ever so tweaked, ever so in such a small ways when things you go, that, you know, that's either impossible or that just feels a bit wrong. But everything else, you know, people, it can be a struggle, but we still say, well, it's what he wrote and it's what's supposed to be. So if it's hard work, we just work on it and we get through it.
Indeed.
But it's, yeah, there were a couple. I think there was one line in Children of Hurin for one of the other characters which just sounded, it was too fast. He just couldn't get through the words the way it was written. So there's that. There was one line in Fall of Gondolin where we just changed octave of a note that was in a passing thing, that he just, because we ended up emphasizing a weird word of the sentence. Yeah,
yes.
but yeah,
I forgot about that one.
yes, but there's not been many throughout the entire thing. Definitely the first 4 recordings we've done, they are basically as Paul wrote, just maybe some speeds. Paul obviously felt things a lot slower in his youth. We've had to speed up a few things. The scenes in Doriath in Beren and Luthien were rather slow to start with, but but that's the good thing of working on it with Paul. We work on it, and we have brand new versions of the scores now with new speeds and new everything, and it actually, you know, they work. They do.
Yes.
So it's evolved as you've worked and as you've brought it to life and seen how it really functions as a performed piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And we have ended up with new critical editions of scores as well.
Yeah.
Because I have every single instrument I have listened to, playing every single note all the way through, because that's how I have to build up the sampled orchestra. So I have to listen through every single instrument, playing every note that it plays and checking for balance and checking all that. So I've heard these pieces probably more than Paul has.
Yes.
It's you know, they build up, but it does mean that we get to find where there might have been little slips, because you know, these scores some of them have quite an age to them, and the old Sibelius files and the old things, the errors creep in as you update stuff. So it's good to have brand new versions where
Sorry, it's just me dropping my copy of the Silmarillion. Crashing to the ground in astonishment at this work. Talking of your copies of the scores and your press materials and things, and I can see some on the wall behind you there. You have some art from, I believe it's Ted Naismith's art that you've used. So tell me, what's the connection with Ted there? Because again, of course, you wouldn't be using that without his permission. So how did that come about?
Well, Ted got in touch with me back in the 1990s when he'd heard. I think he may have actually bought one of the synthesized copies of the score at that time. He certainly wrote to me and actually said how much he was interested in it. And it was only when we were getting around to the stage of actually doing the production of The Fall of Gondolin that I got back in touch with him and sort of said, would he mind if we use some of his art? And he was very happy to do that.
And he's taken part in the same manner as the singers. He's only on a profit share. We are so grateful to him, because his imagery has become the album. It's what people recognize, and it's amazing. But yeah, he's signed on to a profit share with the rest of us. He's you know, he's been wonderful, and he helps when we're getting close to getting the CDs together. Usually tells me when I put the text in the wrong place and things. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, this is one of the things I love about the Tolkien fandom, is that it's a real family. I love how people come together. It's one of the things that we've found with the One Ring, with all the years that we've been around as a website. And, you know, our tagline is forged by and for fans of J.R.R. Tolkien. And I really do feel that there's this community, and that people like Ted Naismith, these great artists or great scholars and writers, and they're all happy just to say, yeah, let's do this together, or because everyone's passionate about exploring Middle Earth and exploring the Legendarium and exploring the First Age and all of this. So the two of you, obviously, you're a composer and a singer, but you're obviously also big Tolkien fans. How did you first encounter each other and discover this shared fandom?
Yeah, so that one falls to me, doesn't it?
It does.
I have been a Tolkien fan for a very long time. I lapsed briefly as a teenager, but the films actually rekindled that. And then I went back and started reading everything again. But it was it would be six years ago now, slightly more. I was asked to organise a concert to commemorate World War One, and I started. I just thought, well, there's a chance here to find pieces of music or poetry that has been set by people that served in World War One. And me knowing Tolkien's works, I just thought, well, there must be someone who has set Tolkien to music. And I knew about Donald Swann, and I knew about the fabulous Tolkien ensemble. And I just thought, has there anyone else? Because I'd done some of the Donald Swann songs, but I just thought, is it worth? And it was a very boring, long trip from Milton Keynes to Plymouth whilst I was touring with work. And I sat on my phone searching, and I found Paul's old website. And I sat reading quite happily. Julian was driving. I wasn't reading whilst I was driving, honestly. And I was sat reading quite happily, and I just thought there's such a wealth of things in it. And there was a link to contact Paul, and I sent an email saying, I'd quite like to see some of your music and things because I'm trying to organise this concert and stuff. And I got a reply back almost straight away, which was quite, and
You nearly bit your hand off.
Nearly bit my hand off. Yeah, I got a reply back, and basically said, "Oh, there are scores. Some of my scores are in the TKF Music Library in the Wales Millennium Centre." I was like, "That's where I work." So when I got back from tour, I went and had a little look through the scores, and it was. I mean, there were massive vocal scores and orchestral scores in there, and I was flicking through them. I said, "Oh, can we talk more? Do so." And Paul just went, "Yeah, yes." He told me the town where he lived, which also happens to be the town where I live. So he's Paul's at the other side of the valley from us in South Wales. So it was just one of those things that just ended up slightly fated. And then in the end, we didn't use. Unfortunately, the time caught up with us for the concert, and we didn't use any of Paul's music, but we did. So I helped him recover some of his scores that were on old Sibelius files, and it left me with bits and bobs of his scores that needed to be cleaned up and things. So I to be honest, the first bit of Fall of Gondolin that was recorded was the big aria, The Horns of Ulmo, and I recorded that without Paul knowing, and I used the orchestral samples and everything that I had, and I was I made it and I sang it and sent it to him. The reaction I got was wonderful. I mean, to be honest, I was croaking my way through it and sight reading it, but it was just great to hear bits of it, and that's when we started. We speak almost every day now, or we'll be sending emails of hate messages to each other for various things. Yeah, but we've now ended up in this wonderful position where we work together on things, and we're still working on things. I mean, the Tolkien stuff is wonderful. We've started working on a few other bits and bobs after that, but we've just ended up with this kind of wonderful relationship. And the thing I love is that Paul doesn't take himself too seriously with his music. So I feel quite free to phone him up and say, "Why did you write that like that?"
And sometimes I don't know the answer.
Yes. But yeah, so we've we live about quarter of an hour from each other in the Welsh valleys. And it's a wonderful coincidence, but it's ended up being a wonderful venture that we've done. And I mean, now we've got between us, Paul, mostly Paul, but he's created a music trust for the care of his music, and he's left myself and Julian in charge of that as well as him. So we have this wonderful, and we've been cleaning up all of his music, getting it all ready, having it all out there. Our remit is to record everything, however long it takes. So we'll get through everything. And it's the lockdowns actually of the last couple of years helped with that, bizarrely. Yes. Because we were looking for things to do, and because we couldn't really go out and do anything, we started recording videos and releasing videos on YouTube of various. And Paul just said, "Just do anything of mine that you want." So we have there's loads of videos of Paul's music online now. So nothing massive scale, but there's little snippet. There's definitely a snippet of War of Wrath on YouTube that I recorded, and there's a few other bits and bobs, but it's just been wonderful. We've got this. I've just got this massive, because you've got 74 opus numbers now, 75 maybe.
Something like that.
Yeah. But there's
some do more than that.
I know some do more than that, but not all of them are epic length like the Silmarillion.
So you're talking about, you mentioned videos out on YouTube. So the next thing has got to be, we've got to make sure that people know who have watched this and are like, I need to hear these recordings. Where can they find scores, recordings, everything that they might want to discover of these pieces?
Okay, well, that's the easier answer is direct from us. If you look for Paul's website, which I'm sure will be linked in various things, or for Volante's website, we have all the CDs, we have all of it. I do shameless, but we have the scores here and all that kind of stuff. Scores are only
it's Volante Opera, right? That people need to look at.
Opera Productions, yes. Yeah, with the scores are only available from us. We are trying to work out if we can distribute them differently, but we make them in so small numbers. There's only, I think there's only about 5 or 6 orchestral scores created at a time. So it's in some ways it's better if they're just direct from us, because you can't, we can't afford to distribute hundreds and hundreds of them. The CDs are released by Prima Facie. They are so they are on Amazon and places like that, but Amazon and similar only supply via demand. And of course, there hasn't been much demand to this point, so they only had a few copies. So I think at this point in time, they've possibly sold out, but hopefully we'll get some more up to them soon. We are on downloading online platforms, so the likes of iTunes and things like that. I'm afraid though, because of the nature of how we record and how we're working, and we want to pay people, and we also want to be able to pay for Warren Roth to come out, we are not on the streaming platforms. I know, I will freely admit this, I know last week I found out that for some reason some of our stuff had ended up on Spotify. It has to unfortunately have been taken down, because the returns from that, literally one physical CD sale via us, is more than we would get in a year off of those platforms.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And this has been, as you say, a Herculean labor of love, and people deserve to get something back for their labors. So no, people who want to hear your music, we encourage them to go and buy a CD or buy a download, buy the score, and reward the people who are putting in all the work and all the creativity.
They all deserve it. They've been incredible. The best way of making sure that more money goes to everyone is to buy direct from us. But I will warn you, if you don't buy direct from us, you're dealing with me. I am one person. I will answer everything. I will do everything. But the one bugbear that is a problem is postage worldwide. It is what it is. We will only ever charge you exactly what it costs to post.
Well, and we all know that postage costs are insane at the moment. So again, that's just the nature of the beast, that we all have to, when we want to ship things, that's what it costs. So Volante Opera Productions, people need to look for, or look for Paul Corfield Godfrey online, right?
Paul has a brand new website that went live a few months ago that I spent months creating. Also on there, it is definitely worth, there is an entire section dedicated to Paul's Tolkien works. There is the full libretto or lyrics for every single one of the operas, all 5 of them. There is also a complete analysis of each piece by Paul. And also, for my own sanity, which helped me in recordings, there is a guide, complete guide to Paul's version, I will say Paul's version of the Silmarillion, on that website as well. So even if you don't know the Silmarillion very, very well, you can look on there, and there's just little snippets for each character or each thing that's mentioned. But like I say, it is Paul's version, so there will be minor differences. So if you're using it for the books, you might get confused, because we have had to simplify a few family trees and a few things like that. Paul's website is the best place. There's even, because the music is composed in a similar way to how Wagner wrote things. So Paul uses what are called leitmotifs, so themes for different people and for different things. And we've also created on Paul's website, there's an entire page where you can hit play and hear a theme played, so that when you listen to the full opera, you can hear that theme. So, and that took some building up, but I think it helps, because I've lived like I say, I've heard these works more than Paul now. I've because I listened to them multiple, but when you start to connect themes with people and themes with things, and you hear them come in, he's far too clever for his own good with things like that. But you start to hear, and it makes the experience even better. I mean, imagine the Hobbit theme from Howard Shaw's score. You know, when you start connecting it, all the fellowship themes, you get that feeling. And obviously, the first time you listen through Paul's works, you will, you know, you go, oh, that's that. You go, oh, that's wonderful. Like, oh, wow, that's epic. But then you start to realize how much detail there is in everything, and we are trying to help everyone with that. So literally everything is on Paul's website, and we are working on it constantly, adapting, adding stuff. I think I noticed there was an entry missing from the guide as well, so I haven't mentioned Ungoliant.
Maybe you can even at some point share one or two bits of correspondence with Christopher Tolkien or with Rainer Unwin or something on there. These things. I mean, this is a real legacy that you've got here. It's not just your beautiful music and this incredible art that you've created together, but the whole legacy of your interaction with the Tolkien family, with the estate, to bring this into being is a wonderful, rich thing.
I've included on my website quite a bit of background information, including the story about me singing with my head in a bucket, which always used to go down well. I've included quite a lot of that on the website, and
I think we need to recreate it for a picture.
It was a very old battered steel bucket. I'm not sure.
Oh, we'll find one. We'll find one.
Excellent. And then you can just kind of wear some old-fashioned clothing and age the photo and pretend it was taken at the time. No one would know.
The one thing I would actually reinforce was Simon's thing about the actual the way that the money generated out of this not only goes to pay the performers for the work they already put in, but also goes towards underwriting the costs of future productions. And we are at the moment hoping in due course to actually go back and revisit my earlier work on Tolkien, including Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. But we can only start doing that once we actually have got the income to actually cover what would probably be a massive project.
Well, then that is a very good reason for people to rush and buy CDs and MP3s and scores, because that would be exciting to have that come out in the future. You took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say, what's next? I know you're finishing the War of Wrath, and when that's done, well, Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, how exciting. That's a lot of richness for us all to enjoy right now and to look forward to in the future. Simon, Paul, I want to thank you both so much for spending this time today. Last words, thoughts, other things you wanted to share?
Oh, just speaking as a music lover, and I know I'm biased because I'm on there, but I'm an opera singer with 20 odd years experience. I have done many modern works. I have done many contemporary pieces. There are very few of them that I would go back to, and the fact that I have dedicated 6 years to these pieces should stand for something. They are incredible. They are. And if you're not a fan of opera, give it a try. Trust me. These are not. This is not opera. I mean, they are in English mostly. There's a couple of bits of Elvish and things, but you know, you follow along with the libretto. Just immerse yourself in it. The opera is not something to be listened to in the background. It's sit down, have a listen, and let yourself be taken away, because you've got the entire story of the first age of the Silmarillion set out for you in a way that's dramatic and soars, and it's incredible.
And I would like to say thank you very much. It's been an absolute amazing situation for me, after having had so many years of people saying, oh no, this can't be done, it's too large, it's too big, it's too old-fashioned. I've actually was told once.
It's not old-fashioned.
You know, and to actually be able to actually sit down now and be able to listen through to it from start to finish, it's a realization of a dream.
Right? Wonderful. And it's for everyone who's sort of lamenting the fact that we haven't had any kind of film or television version of the Silmarillion at this point, and you know, who knows what the estate will do in the future, but at the moment that's not on the cards. Well, here is the chance to dramatically immerse yourself in the full, more or less, tale of the Silmarillion from start to end. What could be better?
Incredible. It is incredible. it's a hell of a journey from beginning to end, trust me.
Journeys, that's what Tolkien's all about. We're all about those epic travels. So, well, thank you both so much. I want to encourage people to check out Volante Opera Productions and look for Paul Corfield Godfrey's website online, and we'll put links everywhere we post this as well. But go and check out the music, and guys, maybe we can connect again when you finished War of Wrath and
Absolutely.
hear a little bit more.
We are hoping War of Wrath will be out. It's dependent on a few sales and things, but War of Wrath will most likely be out in late spring, early summer of next year, 2020.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Cheers.